Hello, everybody. So we're back together, and let me just take these glasses off. I just use these for reading. I'll need to. I'm going to look at a few points here, but my purpose today is just to clarify a few things for us as we go forward. And first of all, I want to let you know that next week, from Wednesday until Friday late evening. I'm going to be in Atlanta, Georgia at a sociology conference where I'm presenting a few papers. And so I will be online. I will be checking my email, but maybe not quite as regular as I do here when I'm at home. So if you need to get a hold of me, please send an email. But if you don't get an answer right away or in a few hours, it may be because I'm caught up at the conference. But it won't slow us down. And then also, I just wanted to mention, instead of giving a lecture on these next few chapters, which they're self-evident, I want to clarify something here for us, and that is that chapter 6 onward are historical chapters. After chapter 5, we're finished with the theoretical scaffolding, if you will, modeling. So we know the theories, we have the concepts, now it's time to apply them historically, and that's how these chapters are go. They're historical chapters talking about the historical timelines for various minority groups, and so they read much more historical. Lots of historical information are in these chapters. So what do you need to know for that final exam? Of course, I'm going to be giving you an extensive review. But I can tell you what's going to be there, and that's the timelines for each group on that final exam is the most important. And what I mean by timeline, the things that you're going to need to know, is going to be the timelines in terms of major developments in social movements of the group, movements, migrations of the group, and then thirdly, governmental policies dealing with that particular group. So you've got those three areas really to focus on. Major changes in the group, social movement-wise, then the various policies that are directed towards that minority group. And also, I forgot to also mention, in terms of the social movements, leaders within those social movements, who they were, what was the main orientation of their philosophy on, for example, social change or direct action, like the difference between, for example, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, right? So this is going to be the main area that we'll be dealing with as we go forward, is that you touch base. So for African Americans, look at their timeline in terms of the development of the civil rights movement, the splintering off with the Black Power movement, who were the main players. Then look at the major governmental legislation and policies and programs. So those are the main areas that you need to study and know, and be able to distinguish that from, say, Native Americans in the Native American movement, right? The Red movement it was called, the Red Power movement. Who were the main players? What was the governmental policies that were formed, directed at Native Americans, right? Who were the major players? Again, these are the major timelines. So I'm not going to be really, unless I say so in the final exam review. I'm not after very extreme minutia in terms of historical writing. Sometimes it's full of all the small minutiae of events and dates, and I'm not going to really hold you to that so much sociologically. We're going to be looking at also at the end of these chapters, they'll talk about another area to look at. Things like employment for the group and in the present. They look at things such as the discrimination and prejudice levels. So you'll also want to touch base with those. So I'm really giving you a strong hint at where the final test will be. For example, they look at primary structural simulation, cultural simulation. They look at secondary structural simulation for the group, and you can make comparisons. The reason why I gave you these concepts in the first 5 chapters is so you can make comparisons across these groups. And that's kind of what you want to keep in mind as you study for the finals, being able to make those comparisons for each group that we cover. So just quickly, and again, I'm not going to really lecture on these points because it's there for you in the textbook, and I really don't see any sense in me just going over the historical information you can glean from the chapter. For example, things such as the U.S. Supreme Court decision, the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, 1954, is an important piece of legislation you need to know about. You need to really know about the 1964 Civil Rights Act, what that was about, who brought it about, what was it pertaining to, and then also the 1965 Voting Rights Act. What was it about? Who brought it about? What did that accomplish? Right. And then you're going to want to look at the beginnings of the Civil Rights Movement. Who were the leaders? What were the goals of the Civil Rights Movement? And then in the later 1960s, the Black Power movement. What was its orientation? What was its goals? How did it differ from the Civil Rights Movement? Who were its major players, its leaders? Then you want to look at, as we get later into the history, for example, it talks about African Americans now are largely primary simulation, structural simulation. They are a acculturated group. But centuries of separate development have created a unique black experience in American society. They talk about African Americans as still being low on secondary structural simulation, in terms of, that is, being highly represented across the board in terms of occupations, for example. Even though it's gotten better, we still find there's still a lot of structural, a long way to go in terms of secondary structural simulation. So that's the main point for this chapter. I'm going to put up a debate and a video or two. With these chapters, I'm going to try to do a little bit less out of the readings, maybe a reading here and there, because simply you're working on your papers now. So I'm giving you time to do that and to read these chapters. And as we move through these and as we move towards the final exam, I'm going to give you a really good review over the timelines of what you're going to need to know for that final exam. But I want you to know that now as you're studying, so you can put these in your notes. Again, is to look at the changing trajectory of the group. For example, in African Americans, the movement from the rural to the urban area in the South, that really helped to spur on the Civil Rights Movement. But also that the migrations northward into the northern cities, and the northern experience for African Americans was different from the southern experience. You're going to want to know why and how. In the South you had de jure segregation. In the North you had de facto segregation. What's the difference? Give examples of that. And then in the northern part of the country, you had the development of the Black Power movement, and how that reflected the urban conditions in the North, and how they differed from the Civil Rights Movement. These are the important areas. Again, the timeline, the major shifts, migration patterns, class development within minority groups, the development of the middle class, African American middle class in recent years, and how that has shaped the African American experience. These are the things to focus on. Dates of the major policies. Know the policies for each group, right? And be able to think of them in a timeline fashion, which the chapters are laid out that way. And these are an important points that you want to know for each one of these groups for the final. So I'm gonna stop at this point and go ahead and read your chapters. And again, as I've said from the beginning, if you've got any questions, send me. If you've got a question about a concept or a historical time period, whatever it is, send me an email and I'll do my best to answer it for you and give you examples and so that you come to understand what you're reading. So go ahead and I'll put up go ahead now and put up the debate question for this chapter on African Americans for you to read, and then I'd like for you to give your best educated comments after you've read all of the positions, and give your educated comment on the debate itself. Okay. Well, thank you, and so we'll see you again. I'll always, for each chapter, we're going to have one of these openings, and I will talk to you about some of the timelines for each group. All right. So have a great week and a great weekend.